Everyone, how are you guys doing today?
Hello!
Yay! So, my name is Angela. I'm going to be your moderator for this wonderful discussion. I'm going to let Mr. Dominic Glynn introduce himself to you guys, and then we will talk some questions.
Thank you, Angela. Well, some of you will know, I'm Dominic Glynn. I wrote music for Doctor Who between 1986 and 1989, beginning with the 1986 Trial of the Time Lord theme arrangement. And then following on from that, I did 4 episodes of the Trial of the Time Lord, followed by the last 2 episodes of the Trial of the Time Lord, Dragonfire, Happiness Patrol, and Survival. Killing off, as I always say, the classic Doctor Who in 1989.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead.
Wasn't my intention.
Oh, yeah. Music has that effect on some people.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with Doctor Who questions, and then we'll move into more musical type questions. So, were you a fan of Doctor Who growing up before you actually got to the music?
Yeah, definitely. I was always a fan. I was never a sort of a member of a fan organisation or anything, but I always loved it. And if you look in my loft, you'll find all these little comic strips I used to draw of Dalek, stories, and I used to cut out little bits from TV comic and stick them in and pretend they were my own comics. So I was like, cut out the little figures from a story out of TV comic or TV Actions, the 2 little comics we used to get when I was young, and then rearrange them into new stories, and that would be my Doctor Who comic. So yeah, I was always growing up a fan of Doctor Who, but when I actually went for the job, I had to sort of scale it down a little bit because there was a little bit of, there was some of the fandom with John Nathan Turner was a bit hostile. So John Nathan Turner who was the producer, and if you don't know, he was the producer in the 80s of Doctor Who. He was a little bit wary of some areas of fandom. So when he said to me in the interview, one of the interviews I went to see him about, and he said, "Are you a fan?" And I sort of thought, well, if you're asking me in a suspicious way, or whether you're sort of saying, "Hey, do you like the show?" So I didn't quite know how to interpret it, but I kind of trod a middle line and told him that yes, I was a fan of the show, and then I went, not a fan, just in case it was going to upset him. He said, "Okay, fine." Yeah.
Who was your first Doctor?
Patrick Troughton. Although, having said that, I did have a little toy called Give a Show Projector, which was like a sort of plastic slide projector that had for kids that had strips, like a 6-strip story, and you could project it on your wall. It was a really exciting toy, and I had Doctor Who strips, which were William Hartnell. I could never quite understand who was this funny old man who was claiming to be Doctor Who in these little strips, because I'd not really seen. Although I must have had some distant memory of seeing William Hartnell, because I can remember. Was it William Hartnell? Maybe it wasn't. What was the one with all the insides of Daleks being dropped inside was that Power of the Daleks or something? Yeah, well, maybe I don't remember seeing any William Hartnell. I'm not, he's so vague. I would have been 2 when it first went on, 3 when it first went on air, so too young for that, but Patrick Troughton.
So, what is different about your Doctor Who soundtrack to previous Doctor Who soundtracks?
That's a really good question. I think, I know what I was aiming to do that was different. I was trying to make the music sound a little bit more like a film soundtrack rather than the very, very small scale TV feel that a lot of the music had before. And I always felt that there was nothing to stop a film score sounding big and dramatic, but being done on electronics. And subsequent, actually I don't know when it came out, but a lot of films have proved that's true. I always single out Blade Runner as being a great example. The whole score was electronic, and yet it's an epic and sounds fantastic. But I always felt that a lot of the music in Doctor Who was a bit small and a bit sounded a little bit cheap sometimes. And I thought, well, there's no need, there wasn't a big budget on Doctor Who, but there was no reason why the actual musical soundtrack had to sound small as well. I wanted to make it a bit more cinematic. So that was what I was aiming for. Although, having said that, I didn't have all the equipment to achieve my goal, certainly not originally. I was just sort of trying to make do with what I'd got, equipment-wise.
What was your equipment-wise then?
Well, when I started, blimey. Well, I had a real. Well, before I started, I hardly had anything. So when I sent the demos into John Nathan Turner that I did on a cassette tape, they were done on a 4-track cassette machine, which enabled you to overdub 4 times, so you could do 4 things on top of each other. And the sound was just, I mean, cassettes sound awful at the best of times. So if you imagine splitting the width of a cassette tape, which is like that tiny, into 4, that the sound quality was just dreadful. But somehow John liked what I sent him, that I'd done with these demos. And I had no concept of him saying yes, he wanted me to do the music. So I sent these in. And then he just said, yeah, we'd like you to do the first 4 episodes. And okay, yeah, I haven't got any equipment. I didn't say that to him, of course. I said, yeah.
Oh no, you're like, I have a job.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Then I put the phone down and I went, I've got no equipment. What am I going to do? So I left my job, because I had a full-time job at the time, left that, took the money that I'd got for the pension fund in that job, and used it to buy a bit more equipment. So I bought an 8-track tape machine, reel-to-reel. Do you know what they are? I don't use them anymore. And so 8-track reel-to-reel, which meant I could do 8 overdubs instead of 4, and an 8-track mixing desk, so I had control over all the different levels of all the 8 tracks, and I had a Korg 770 synthesizer, which was like a fairly, even when I bought it, it was quite rare. I don't know why I bought that one. It was just, I think it happened to be the synth that was in the local synthesizer shop, if that makes sense. It was a keyboard shop, and it was just, this wonderful looking synthesizer with wooden panels on the side, and it was just. So I bought that, and so I've had that for a few years actually, and I bought a Yamaha DX21. Sorry if this is a bit techie for people who aren't too techie, but this was called FM synthesis, which was a relatively new method of creating synthesized sounds in the 80s. And the DX21 was a kind of junior version of the DX7, which was the one that everybody who was a professional would have used, but I couldn't afford it, so I got that cheap one. And so I got away. Oh, and I had a Roland Juno 6, which is a classic Roland polyphonic synthesizer. But that was a total, I had nothing else at all. It was certainly at the beginning, so everything was played in by hand. It was all recorded like a real musician. And yeah, so there was no MIDI, no sequencing or anything, so it was all done purely to tape by hand.
Well, what were some of your favorite pieces that you did do for Doctor Who?
Well, I suppose the one that springs to mind is the first thing that I ever did, which was the opening of the Trial of a Time Lord, which I wrote for sort of like a final demo for John Nathan Turner. He was sort of about to offer me the work, but I think he wanted one more example of what I could do to make sure that he wasn't making a mistake. So he sent me the script of episode 1 of Trial of a Time Lord, and he said, I'd like you to score the opening scene from the script, which is not something you normally do. You normally write the music from the video. But obviously as a demo, he asked me to write this opening scene. So I wrote that, just having to imagine in my head how long the sequence was going to be, and to sort of picture in my mind what it was all going to look like. As it turned out, it looked even better than I thought in my mind what I imagined it was going to look like. The model shot at the beginning of Trial of a Time Lord is really is awesome. For Doctor Who, they'd never spent money like that on a special effect, and it really showed. So for more than one reason, that's kind of the piece that sticks in my mind as my favourite in a way, because that's what got me the job. When we actually got to work, when I got to work on the show itself, obviously then I got the video of the sequence, and then I had to adapt what I'd written, because I'd written it too long, because I had no idea how long the sequence was going to be. So I had the demo version, and then the version that actually went on air, which is slightly shorter and maybe slightly different tempo. I can't remember, but so that for sort of sentimental reasons as well. But also I've got a sort of love of the scene in the Happiness Patrol where Fifi cops it, and it was really difficult to try and sort of emote over a dead puppet. But the thing is, Sheila Hancock put in such a fantastic performance. She was so upset over the death of this. Have you all seen it? Yeah. So she put in such a fantastic performance. It became a much easier job for me to write some really sort of music, which I did with the help of Adam Burney, who was the harmonica player who was playing harmonica for the soundtrack on that story, and he just knows how to make a harmonica cry. So so that's another piece I'm fond of.
Okay, well, last night during your concert, I don't know if were you guys there? Yeah. Awesome, yeah, it was a fantastic concert.
Thank you.
You did a remix
Yes.
of one of your songs,
Yep.
and you said you tried to give it a real horror theme.
Yeah.
Is that something that you try to do in a lot of your music? Are you a horror
fan? Not so much that I'm a horror fan, but I'd always had my the part of Doctor Who that I always loved most was the sort of scary aspect of it. Aside from when I was 4 or 5 and I wasn't allowed to watch it because I get bad dreams, the bits that I always loved about Doctor Who were the darker bits, mixed with the comedy. I always loved the funny parts, but I always liked it when Doctor Who sort of took a walk on the wild side and got dark. And so, yeah, I don't know whether I knew, because the thing that we're talking about was it was a 4-track EP called Variations on a Theme, which was released in, I think, 1990. And as I say, all the 3 composers who worked on the show were asked to contribute a variation on the Doctor Who theme. And I think I might have known what the other 2 were doing. So Keith, in his inimitable style, did this fantastic Latin jazz version of the Doctor Who theme. And Mark was doing a kind of an 808 drum machine electro style version of the Doctor Who theme, and I knew that I wasn't going to do either of those sort of things, and I thought I would explore the dark side, and so I just thought, okay, I'll call it the terror version and just create this big semi-orchestral soundscape at the beginning and everything, and change it a bit so that like the middle section was in a minor key instead of being in a major key and all that sort of thing, just playing around with it, because we had total license to do whatever we wanted with the arrangements that we put on. So yeah, that was the original. Well, it's not even a remix because that was a complete new recording. But what I was playing last night was remixes of. Well, that was a remix of that Terror version, and then of course all the other stuff that you heard last night was also remixed from music that I'd originally written, back in the 80s.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to go into a little bit of more musical questions. So, what is your background with music? Did you go to school for it? Did you? No. I came from a musical family, so everybody in my family played an instrument. I didn't. I'm the only one that didn't have any training. Weirdly, my brother's a trained musician. He's a pianist and he's a piano teacher, but we both went in very different directions. So he's a classical player and he doesn't really write music at all, but I just grew up, we had a piano in the house and I always just used to want to bash out my own tunes on the piano. And I can remember when I was very young, obviously this is really weird because I must have wanted to be a composer when I was 6 or something, because I remember we had some like blank manuscript paper at home. And I used to get a pen and just draw dots on this, because I'd seen music around the house, I used to draw dots on this manuscript paper and imagine I was writing great symphonies, and I'd give it to my brother to play, because he could read music, and I'd say, here, play this, and he'd play this, and it'd be nothing, because I didn't have a clue, so I can't play this, it doesn't mean anything, no, I can't play it. So I had no training whatsoever, and then, because we had the piano, I used to sit there and I'd learnt C major. I think because my mum she was a pianist as well, but not to any great standard. But she used to teach a few sort of children, had a few lessons that she used to give to children. So she gave me the basics in how to play a C major chord or a scale of C. I didn't learn any scales basically, and I didn't learn any of the techniques that I should have done. So I tend to play like that with those 3 fingers. Occasionally that one comes into play. And if I have to play an octave, okay, the little finger comes out.
but it's all self-taught. And then we started a band. So the real thing about playing came about when I was about 16, and then me and some mates started a band at school, and almost by default I didn't play anything else. I was the keyboard player, and that actually went on for quite a long time. The band, through different sort of variations, kept going for a while, and people came and people left, but I was sort of constant all the way through it. When other people went off to become lawyers or dentists or whatever, and I thought, no, I don't want to do that, I just want to do music. So I kept going with it, and in the end the band was whittled down to just two of us. So we were, by that point it was the early 80s, and we were a kind of neo-romantic kind of early 80s synth pop duo. And then by this point we were both on keyboards, and we actually did get a record deal, but the record never got released. And it was one of those things, you get taken right up, we got a record deal, and it never got released. So then you get down, and I was by this point a bit despondent, but I knew that I wanted to work in music somehow or other, and that's pretty much what led me to start writing to TV producers like John Nathan Turner, bless him, who sort of, the first person that went, yep, okay.
So when you were writing, did you just send cassettes in with the writing?
Yeah, I'd send in letters in the old days when we used to type letters on a typewriter, and we'd send it and put a stamp on it and send it in, and I'd pack a little cassette in. And so I sent John Nathan Turner, I think I sent him 2 separate demo tapes on cassette, which were, I've said this before, but it's really weird. They were really experimental, and I'm so surprised John Nathan Turner went for it, because they were really sort of out there, electronic-wise, music-wise, and that he obviously,
It's in the 80s, so that was coming into its shell.
Yeah, that's right. But again, it was also very dark what I sent in. It was really quite sort of spooky stuff.
Now, you've done music that's been featured on a lot of TV shows, from The Simpsons to Erie, Indiana to Doctor Who. What are some of your favorite pieces that you've worked on throughout the years?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I can tell you what's not my favourite, but the one that has earned me the most money. It's just typical, isn't it? You toil for weeks and weeks on something you love and you're so proud of, and it doesn't earn you any money at all. Then you do something, knock something out in half an hour, and it earns you loads of money. So I did something which I wasn't terribly proud of, and because of the brief that I was given, which was to write middle of the road music, and it's kind of not my scene. But I wrote this middle of the road sort of track, and it was hello, and it was used in a TV commercial for a washing powder, and it turned out they ran this advert for years in the UK and in Europe, and I think in Asia as well. So it's a really odd thing. But yeah, I've written a lot of music. I mean, so many tracks I've written about. I did do a count of this. I must have written about 1,000 pieces of music, I think, with various different publishers. So it's quite difficult to single it out, because what I do, and I haven't explained this, what I do is I write for music publishers who produce production library music. Now, in Doctor Who circles, this is often being referred to as stock music, because it used to be. That's what they used to call it in the 50s, really, in the 50s and 60s. But it's off-the-shelf music that was not written specifically for a TV programme, but was made available for TV and film and advertising and all that sort of stuff. So the big publishers, I mostly work for Universal and Warner Brothers. They have these divisions that are producing specifically music for TV and film. And so they commission me to write sometimes a whole album, sometimes 3 or 4 tracks in a particular style or a particular aimed at a particular market. So they might say we need 4 tracks of hip hop, or instrumental hip hop or something, or they might say we need some music for baseball. We're going to do an album of music for baseball. That might sound stupid, but when sports TV shows are looking for music to accompany the big trailer for whatever the next big thing is, they need some music in the background, and they need music that's sort of tailored to that need. So they don't obviously then ring up some guy and say, could you write me some music for this trailer? They go so the music's already been written. So I now get asked to write music in almost every conceivable genre. One of the things I've sort of got known for in writing library music is the wide range that I can do. So they tend to ask me to do all sorts of different things. So I have done orchestral film score type stuff. Recently did some stuff in the style of kind of Pixar and DreamWorks, CGI animation music, that kind of thing. And that was fantastic because that was with a full orchestra. And that's quite rare these days because nobody's got the budgets to pay for the orchestra. So when that happens, it's real, I'm grinning from ear to ear when the orchestra's got my music and there's a conductor, because I'm not trained, I get a conductor in to conduct, and I'm just sitting there going, it's wonderful doing that. So that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of recently. This is only about a year ago, so this is a couple of tracks I did. In fact, I wrote them. One of them I wrote with my wife, which is fantastic for me as well, because she writes on the piano and then I take what she's written and arrange it and score it. So we were both at this recording session, and it was in a church in southeast London, and everything was all set up with mobile recording systems and everything, and we just recorded this orchestra, and they were just incredible. I don't know how people who are trained musicians can just get a piece of music that they've never heard or seen before, stick it in front of them, the guy waves his baton, and then they just play it, and I just melt.
Lots and lots of practice.
Yeah, a lot of practice, yeah.
So, where you were saying you have to write in a lot of different genres, how do you prepare, what type
research.
of listen to
Research. So if I get asked to write, so what am I doing at the moment? Film trailer music. So at the moment I'm working on some film trailer music. So again, it's a library of stuff that's aimed at people who are putting together trailers for blockbuster movies. Sometimes if you're doing that kind of work, sometimes you're working to the picture. So I've done a few things where I did actually a dreadful horror film. I didn't even see the film, but they gave me the video of the trailer and said, could you just do all the music for this trailer? And they'll put in all the boom and all that stuff that's in every trailer now. They put that in, and I did all the music in between. But yeah, so the current brief was to do, I think it's 4 I'm doing. I'm co-writing with a friend of mine. 4 tracks that were kind of synthesizer stroke heavy metal hybrids. So they're kind of Trent Reznor type, Social Network type. I'm just trying to think what's the other film he did recently. But all that sort of stuff, so definitely blockbuster, but with this kind of sort of electronic edge to it. So that's what I'm working on. So what I do, as soon as I get the brief, the first thing I do is open up Spotify and listen to everything I can that is kind of close to the thing that they're after. Because a lot of what you're doing with this kind of music is more of the same. They know what they want. You always have to, when you get a brief, you always have to do what you have to please them. It's no good doing your own thing because you just won't get asked to do it again. So you have to understand you're being commissioned to do something to be able to follow the brief. So I slavishly follow the brief, and I listen, research. I sit on YouTube and I watch film trailers, and so it all goes in, and I think, okay, yeah, right, that's what I'm going to do. So that's come about from the very first library album, production library album I was asked to do, which was 1990, just after Doctor Who finished. Fortunately for me, because I didn't have any other work, so Doctor Who finished, library music came along. And the first project they asked me to do was, it was an album called A Night at the Movies. And it was sound-alikes of famous film themes and TV themes. And again, I'd had no training to orchestrate, and they gave me the list of films that they wanted me to imitate or do something like, and it was like John Williams' Star Wars and Superman and Jaws and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and Doctor Who, weirdly. And so I looked at all these lists and I thought, yeah, well, I can do Doctor Who. I know how to do something that sounds like Doctor Who. Batman, yeah, I could do that. Oh God, Superman, how am I going to do that? Because that's like a massive orchestra, and I've only got like a Akai S900 sampler with 17 seconds worth of memory. How am I going to make this believably sound like... Anyway, so that was my research of a lifetime, because there's no way I was turning down this job, because this was a good job, you know. And so I just said, yeah, I can do that. That's the usual thing, to say yes, you can do whatever it is they ask you to do, just say yes and then figure out how the hell you're going to do it.
Younger members of the audience.
Yes, take note.
Take that to heart.
Yeah. So then I listened to every film soundtrack I could possibly. I had to analyse John Williams' orchestration from the point of view of someone who doesn't have a clue what orchestration is all about. So I had to listen just with my ears. Okay, so I knew enough to know what each instrument sounds like. So I could go, okay, he's using French horns there, and he's crescendoing on the French horns. Oh, and then he's bringing in woodwinds, and okay, that sort of thing. Oh, and that's how you get that effect, because you mix that with that. And so just playing the same thing over and over again, just listening and figuring out how that kind of arrangement works. So I then did this this album, which fortunately for me, I've obviously got right for them, because it was one of their best download, well not downloaded, skipped a couple of, it was the most used album that they'd had for a long time on the production library music, and I still earn money off this blooming album now, so this is 25 years later, I'm still earning money from this.
Contracts, you made sure
that's
were
right.
taken care of.
Exactly, yeah. Because, I mean, there's always a use for they don't do them very much now, these sound alikes, but there was always a use for things that sounded like Batman, because if there was a comedy or an advert or something, and they didn't want to, because they wanted some comic effect to do something that wasn't actually Batman, but it was like it, so they would use something that sounded like Batman, or they couldn't afford it, because it may well have been restricted use on certain pieces of music, and the clearance, they had to get clearance to use music, especially if a thing was going to be international. So they wouldn't use the original Batman theme. They'd go and ring up chapels, the library music people, and say, "Have you got anything that sounds a bit like Batman?" And they go, "Well, funny you should say that." And then, and that track. Oh, James Bond. That's right. Yeah, the other track which did really well for me was this James Bond sound alike, and it was just sort of using all John Barry's tropes or his cliches in a way that they could become cliches, but the things that we all love about John Barry's music. And I just took all those elements, and in fact, in the studio when I was recording it, as I said, I only had this one little sampler, which, as I always tell people, you don't know how lucky you are. We had to pay £1,800 for this sampler, which had 17 seconds worth of memory, and now you moan it costs $4 on your iPad, and you've got 5 hours worth of sampling. Different world. But so in the studio when we went to record it, I had a stack of these samplers. So I think we had 8 or 10 of these S900 samplers, each loaded up with a different part of the orchestra. So I'd loaded one with the cellos and one with the violins, and literally I was playing the boxes like they were an orchestra, which was great fun, because this was quite unusual in 1990. And I was in quite a big recording studio in London, and people were in there, like I think Bryan Adams was in there recording that massive hit that he had. What was that called?
Everything.
That's it. He was in the next studio. It's so weird. And his producer came into our studio to marvel at the pile of S900 samplers that we had. It was the most bizarre thing, because they'd never seen anybody hire out, because it all came from the hire company next door, they'd never seen anybody hire out so many samplers. And this is this is a big name producer who's producing a massive number one hit. It was number one for about a year.
It's a good movie too.
Okay, well,
I would just say at least you didn't have to do tape loops across the hall.
No, that's very true. Very true. Yeah.
So, and I see a few of you do have your hands raised. We will be doing questions right after we are finished with these. So just to let you know.
Don't forget the question.
Yes, remember it. Keep it in your mind. So this is actually my last question before we do take questions from the audience. What is a movie soundtrack that you greatly admire or that has influeed you?
Oh, that's a good one as well. Well, there's so many. As we said, John Barry. I love John Barry scores. Ever since I was, a child, my brother's friend used to come around and bring his records, and we put his records on our turntable, and it was he had an album called Ready When You Are, JB, it was called. John Barry, it was the sort of greatest hits of John Barry. I just used to play it over and over, and I loved it. So all the Bond scores, things like You Only Live Twice, is just gorgeous. You know, it's a space, is it called Spacewalk? I can't remember. Anyway, the whole album is great. All the score too on that. Talking about later on, Blade Runner is a fantastic score. Recently, again, I talked about The Social Network, but I was actually commissioned to do some tracks in that kind of style. But I love Trent Reznor's recent work because he's doing something different. So a lot of people moaned when The Social Network won the Oscar for Best Score, and I thought, why are you moaning? Because it doesn't sound like every other score. It sounded really different, and it really worked in context of the film. Whereas, controversially, I didn't like the score to There Will Be Blood, which was everybody lauded as how fantastic the score was. And the only reason I didn't like it was because although it was very different and adventurous, I was so aware of it when I was watching the film that I kept listening. My attention was on the music, whereas the key to, as I'm sure everybody does, the key to a good score isn't that you don't notice it at all, but you're not constantly aware of it, and maybe later on you find yourself humming the main theme that's stuck in my head, and I really like, that. I think people wrongly sometimes think that music has to be so bland and so nothing that you just don't notice it, and people say, was there music in that film? Oh, I didn't even know. That would be a bit of a shame, I think. So I like it when people say, yeah, the music in that film was fantastic, and it really added to the film. As I say, in Let There Be Blood, just for me, I found it was just a bit intrusive. It was almost too experimental for its own good because I wasn't supposed to notice it that much. But that's just me, I don't know.
Okay, so I can go ahead and start taking questions from the audience. I saw this hand back here. Speak very loud.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Hello.
So first of all, I wanted to say I've listened to a lot of your tracks, especially on YouTube, and I love the sort of break from the previous doctors to yours, and I really want to say, first of all, I appreciate your music.
Thank you.
The second point or question I want to say is, I just need some definition of terms. What is an 8-track? What are cassette tapes? What's a tape recorder?
We have a funny guy in the audience.
We do, yeah. Young man.
My actual question, though, is how do you feel about Murray Gold and how he's taken the franchise, so to speak?
Yeah, well, as I always say, I think Murray Gold's a really talented guy. He can write really good music. I think the only problem with Murray Gold is he has to write too much music. So this is a thing that I've always tried to get this across. I did meet Russell T Davies, and I didn't quite get this in. I did get this into who's the other producer with him at the time? Can't remember. Anyway, but my feeling is that Doctor Who worked at its best when they had different composers allocated to different stories. Much as a different director does one story and a different writer does another story. It's a team, but because of Doctor Who being not like any other show, where every story is set in a different era and a different planet and a different, completely different genre, it, to me, lends itself perfectly to having a different team on each story. So I would like it if Doctor Who could employ 2 or 3 or 4 different writers writing the music, because apart from anything else, if you're writing 14 episodes a year, your time is rather spread out. You haven't got the time and effort to put in that you would if you're doing 2 or 3 episodes a year, and you really are devoted to them. We never used to ever repeat a music cue, whereas of course now, almost by necessity, you get the same cue in story after story, maybe occasionally with a slight variation. But I don't blame Murray for it because he has to do it that way. But I would be happier with Doctor Who if it, first of all, it had a little bit more experimentation in the music, because it's, and yet again, I know this isn't Murray's fault. I've heard him talk about this. This is it was a directive from Russell T Davies. When he first got the job, he produced a demo of what he thought the score should sound like, and it was electronic. And he presented it to Russell, and Russell went, yeah, it's quite good. Can you do some more or something? And he went away and did a bit more, and he did some orchestral stuff. And of course, Russell immediately went, yep, that's what we want, yep, okay. And then from that point on, basically, there was no opportunity. Murray wasn't really able to do an electronic score anymore. And the BBC are so scared of changing any part of the recipe that's made it so successful. They're a bit frightened of wavering from that path that they're on. And I understand that Stephen Moffat is not terribly into he doesn't understand music terribly well. So he's let Murray get on because he knows he's a safe pair of hands. But I'd like to see somebody else involved, so that there are. Ben Foster's a great composer as well. So there are a lot of people I think would work really well with Murray. But that's how I'd like to see it. A few different people working alongside Murray, doing different stories.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, were there any of the previous composers who worked on Doctor Who? Were there any of those pieces that influenced any of your work at all?
Not particularly, to be honest, because I was trying to do something very different from them, particularly just prior to me. So it was the Radiophonic Workshop were working on it just prior to me, and I'm a big fan of a lot of the Radiophonic Workshop's work, but I wasn't so keen on what they were doing with Doctor Who just before I took over. And I watched something recently, what was it? I think it was Attack of the Cybermen. And I thought, I would never do it like that. You know, if I was writing for Attack of the Cybermen, I would have approached it so differently. So I wasn't influenced by that kind of era of music. There is one piece of music, though, from early Doctor Who. I love some of the very early Doctor Who music, because I think it was so, again, I'm using that word, it's spooky, because that was the side of Doctor Who I loved, the spooky side. And it's the Cybermen.
Tomb of the Cybermen.
Tomb of the Cybermen is just fantastic, you know, everything about it. And on the face of it, it's a really weird piece of music, you know, what... Tristan Carey.
Oh, you know,
Yeah.
Daleks.
Yeah, absolutely. All that stuff, you know, fantastic. And that's probably the stuff that's more experimental I really like. I actually really like the Sea Devils score, which was ultimately probably the most experimental they ever did. But, you know, and again, you do notice it, but it's Doctor Who. You know, that's the sound of Doctor Who. To me, that was the sound of Doctor Who. Weird electronics.
I have to disagree with you about the Sea Devils being the most experimental they ever did. To me, it was the score for Pertwee and Sarah's story, something of the Daleks with the...
Oh, the London Saxophone Quartet, the quintet.
Yes.
Yes.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I was very aware of that as well, thinking about it growing up. So I would have been, when was that on? 73 or 4?
About.
Yeah. Well, I remember that, so I would have been about 12, and I remember being fascinated that they had decided to do something really different with the score. And that's the first time I noticed that somebody was writing the music almost for Doctor Who, because it was so obvious that it was a different sound from what had gone on before. And I think there was actually a little bit of publicity about it. I think maybe the Radio Times or something put a little article in or something, so that I was aware, and I listened to it, and I thought, oh yeah, this is interesting. Because again, it was kind of an experiment. They never experiment with Doctor Who anymore. It's not very experimental.
Well, it was the first music I'd ever heard for any production that could truly be called alien song.
Yes, sir.
So I was going to ask, is there an episode that you saw that you wish you could have gone back and done the music for that you didn't do, and why would it be the Gunfighters?
Yeah. Well, I would have only been about 3, so I'd have done a really bad job.
Actually, probably not.
I think there are so many I wish I'd done. I wish I'd done Remembrance of the Daleks, which is obviously in my era. I would love to have done. I'd love to have done a Dalek story anyway. I wish I'd had the chance to do a Dalek story, but probably ultimately wish I'd done a really, really good Cyberman story. So I would have loved to have done. Actually, I couldn't have done better than Tomb of the Cybermen. You're right. I couldn't have improved on that one. Let me think. What else?
Would you have had the creative license to do something like that in the 80s?
So that's a really good point. Would John Nathan Turner have... he was obviously open to new things and fresh ideas and everything. That's why he gave so many people a chance. But would he have winced if I'd done something like that? It's a very good point. I don't know. I don't know whether I would have been able to. Probably not. You're right. I probably wouldn't have been able to get away with it.
We have a lady right
Yes.
I wanted to comment, if I could. on
Sorry.
that. Or if I'm correct, didn't Peter Howell actually do Horns of the Nymon, rescore that for his demo?
He may well have done. I don't know. But that sounds
Yes,
quite...
he
Yeah,
did.
there you go. Right. Yeah.
2 scenes out of it.
I want to find out what job you left in order to go work for Doctor Who. You
Well,
said you
yeah.
would quit your job and
Well, it was a government job working in the health and safety executive, and I used to answer the phone and do the filing. And I remember I used to answer the phone and take reports of people falling out of trees or tripping over a cable, and write it all down on a form and then type it into a computer. It's kind of mindless work, really. But I just got promoted in this job, and then the Doctor Who thing came up, and I remember instantly, I'm leaving, and I went to see the boss and said, I'm going to leave because I've got this job writing music for Doctor Who. And I just remember him saying, I think I'm making a very big mistake. Very big mistake. After all, you've just made executive officer. Yeah, I'm not interested.
well, I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
Hey, do you have any other? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
This is kind of more question about your research. If you're listening to a lot of stuff, did you ever spend time transcribing stuff, or did you just do a listening? Like, did that help you to actually kind of play it yourself?
Well, because I haven't got any of the musical training, I can't do anything other than listen. So I listen and then translate that with my hands onto a keyboard to try and create something similar. So it's a combination of listening and getting the sound palette. Is probably the first and most crucial thing. You know, what instruments am I using for this? And then after that, well, you're more than halfway there. So if you've got your orchestration right, you know, the rest of it is somewhere in my head, basically.
I saw a hand up on this side, did I? Or not? Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
sir.
I actually worked in television production for many, many years.
Oh, right.
And I was the end user of some kind of, the bed music.
Production music.
Pulled off the shelf. And what people understand is it's not like a regular CD where there's 12 tracks. There's like 100, and it's 30-second, 60.
Different versions.
Yeah, and then each one has a different tempo cut or whatever. Did you actually wind up, when you did it, naming these tracks? Because they always had the worst titles.
No.
They had
No, I know. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They because you're writing so many of these things, very often I just call them. I remember one album we were doing. In fact, it was the album that had the music for the advert I was talking about, the washing powder, which I was doing sort of a bit. I've got to do this thing, and I was doing some of these tracks with a co-writer, and we were just, because you're submitting all these tracks, you can't come up with a title or even a working title because you just haven't got time and haven't got the energy to think about a title. I'm trying to get the music right. So we were calling them after names of supermarkets. So we had one was called Tesco's or something, and one was called Fresh Save or something. It was just meaningless. And so they were all submitted under the name of supermarkets. Fortunately, the name that they ended up with wasn't quite as bad as the supermarket names, but I did an album of drum and bass music a few years later. And again, no titles at all. And I called one of them, because it happened to be September 1996 when I wrote this track, I just called it September 1996. Well, they called the bloody track September 1996. It went out on the album, September 1996. Nothing like dating a track, is there?
Because it was always, it's like the crystal hummingbird.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm trying to do a commercial, I just need something a little jazz.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, there's an awful lot of, funnily enough, there's an awful lot of work that goes into them titling them, and it's all based on, that you'd be amazed how important the title of the tracks is. If you do it, and I'm trying to think of an example, because I have had some of these, what was it called? but the name of the track will suggest where it ends up getting used. So if you've got a track that they've decided to call, I don't know, On the Field or something, you'll find that a football show will pick it up because they think, oh, it's aimed at, it's right. Yeah, and just looking at it before they've even played it, they have a feeling it might be right for them. Or there is a really good example of this. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a science-based album. So they were trying to do stuff for science documentaries, and whatever they called it, it ended up being used in almost exactly the sort of program that they titled it by. And if they hadn't called it that, it could have ended up anywhere else. I mean, these tracks, don't get me wrong, the music could be used in more than one place. So you write a piece of music, it could be all over the place. But there was one very prominent usage for this piece of music, and it was purely because of the name of the track that they'd given it. So, so it is important. And I think they've realised that more now, which is why they work a bit harder at titling them than they used to, than in the days of September 1996, where they just, call it that.
Start calling it Works Everywhere 540.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Multi-usage, yeah.
Okay, we were just given we are almost out of time card. So
Can't be that.
where can they find you for the rest of the convention?
Right, well, I'm going to be signing copies of the CDs of the music that you heard last night. And I'll be down the autograph, Actors Autograph Alley thing straight after this. So if you want to come and get a CD or two, come and find me and I'll sign them as well. So that's where I'll be.
Fantastic, and thank you so much for sitting here and letting us talk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.